So the topic is wideband acoustic immittance, outcome in normal individuals and individuals with different middle ear pathologies. I'd like to thank you, several individuals who I have used their work in this slideshow, and whenever possible I references others. Basically, we'll talk about background. I'm not going to take you through physics, so you're not going to hate me or kill me. So it should be fine, so don't worry about it. Wideband acoustic immittance principles, again, some practical issues, and then we will talk about wideband acoustic immittance in newborns and children, adults, some case studies, and some future directions. Usually when I present this with audience, it will take about 90 minutes. We'll see how it's going to pan out today. Hopefully, for those of you who stay awake at the end of the show, we will have a chat on questions should anyone have one. Basically, if you look at the history of testing the middle ear and hearing assessment, conventional audiometry, you always test between 250 hertz to 8,000 hertz. However, for many, many years, we've been testing adult middle ear at one frequency. Early on, back in 50s, it was mainly because of ease of calibration and selection of the probe was kind of arbitrary at the time, but it was no longer a technical issue, but people stuck with 226 for many, many years and still are. For infants, we have moved toward, again, single frequency, but higher, because we know 226 cannot detect any changes in the middle ear in babies. So many people are using 1K probe tone for tympanometry as well as acoustic reflex. However, wideband tympanometry or wideband acoustic immittance, which is a terminology coined and recommended by a workshop back in 2011, I believe, or 12, Eric Holmes' workshop, and the proceed of that workshop was published in 2013 in Ear and Hearing. I'll have the slide for that for references. Suggested to use wideband acoustic immittance as a better terminology to encompass different kind of terms that are being used for assessment. So basically, the wideband acoustic immittance or wideband tympanometry, which is capable of doing wideband acoustic immittance at pressurized points, can test the middle ear function across wide range of frequency, as you can see, similar to what you would do in a conventional hearing test. So we know that 226 doesn't work in babies, so that's why we resort to higher frequencies. However, wideband acoustic immittance have been shown to outperform the 226 and 1000 hertz in prediction of middle ear fusions. So there are good evidence emerging from literature that is working at par, if not better, than the conventional immittance assessment battery that we are using currently in the clinic. So if you want to know where the wideband acoustic immittance and tympanometry have come from, again, wideband research system developed by Douglas Keefe and also been around for more than 2 decades. So there are 2 systems available. I'll go over that. So one is kind of emerged from the work of Voss and Allen. John Allen work was later commercialized by the Mimosa Acoustics, and then MEPA system developed based on that, and work of Keefe was commercialized by Interacoustic into a platform of a Titan wideband tympanometry. So they are both commercially available and FDA approved. So as you can see, there are 2 systems originated into house-made systems and then later on commercialized into available machines. Potentially, you can actually go higher than the 8,000 hertz with these systems, but they're not available commercially. Up to 8,000 hertz are available in the commercial machines. You may ask why there's such a long gap between what we know in research lab and those things that are being implemented in the clinic. If you look at the David Kemp first discovery of OAE back in 1979, and then later on the implementation of OAE as a routine practice, there was a huge gap, and he actually mentioned that there are 10 years from what we know that is going to work in the labs to general acceptance among researchers, and about 15 years to get acceptance into the clinical practice. So we are getting close to that timeline. Hopefully more clinicians will kind of move toward that direction, and hopefully this presentation will kind of help you guys toward a better understanding and feasibility of this application. You may ask, what's the advantage of wideband acoustic immittance? It's very fast. You can actually test all those frequencies that I mentioned probably in 2 seconds. If you want to do pressurized, it may take a bit longer depending on your pump speed. Unlike tympanometry, which you have to compensate for the ear canal volume, power, reflectance, or absorbance, we're going to talk about those terms, does not relate on the location of the probe in the ear canal, so it could be readily translated into what you see at the eardrum. So that's another advantage. And also, it has been shown that it's a good predictor of a conductive hearing loss in different studies. So we're going to cover some of those studies in the course of this presentation. We usually use a short click or chirp. On the left side, you can see my cursor here, this is a short click, and this is the spectrum of that click. So it's a very wide range. The limit is imposed by the receiver that is placed in the ear canal, as well as the processing unit. So potentially it can go much higher if you have a proper receiver and proper processing unit in the machine. So that's why a lot of lab custom-made machine can go higher than the typical range that is available in commercial machines. Just to go over the concept, so you are familiar with the ear, hopefully we are all, and energy reflectance and power reflectance is the ratio of the reflected energy over incident energy. So if I put the probe in the ear canal, you will see that probe will send a known energy, which is called incident energy, the blue arrow, into the system. Some of that energy will go through the system, the second mini blue, and some of it is reflected back, the red one. And if you take the ratio of reflected, which is the red one, over the incident, and this is called the power reflectance, it's unitless, meaning that it's only a magnitude. And in children and adults, the location of the probe will not have an impact. So basically what you measure is what you have measured at the level of the eardrum. So there is no need for compensation. Again, there are two scenarios which are not very likely, but I'll take you over that. So the first scenario is that you send the energy in, right? Incident energy, and everything is reflected back. So I call that hell, if you like it or not, because that's not a good thing, because nothing goes through. The second scenario is that when you send energy in and then everything goes in, I call that paradise. Again, that could be fantastic. We are somewhere in between at some frequencies and somewhere at extremes. Hopefully we are never in the hell or paradise. Again, depends on your view. But basically, this is how it's going to look. We are moving toward showing the results in absorbance, but absorbance is the same as reflectance, is one minus the other. So basically, you can say half the glass is full of water and half the glass is empty. You're referring to the same thing. When you're talking about the absorbance, basically 0 means everything is reflected and 1 everything is absorbed. As you can see in this figure, around the mid frequency, you have very high absorbance. And as you move toward very high frequency or low frequency, you get less absorbance or more reflection. If you see the results in a reflectance format, that would have been inverted. So it's the same thing, but in a different direction. So you may ask, what's the name? So what should I use? Early published papers have used power reflectance a lot, but people are moving towards showing the absorbance. The reason for showing absorbance, it kind of goes better with the audiogram, because you know where the energy goes in better and where energy is being reflected more. But it doesn't matter as long as you are happy with the term. So if you look into the literature, you have terms of absorbance, reflectance, wideband reflectance, wideband energy reflectance, ambient reflectance, power reflectance, energy reflectance, middle ear power absorption, wideband acoustic transfer function. So, but none of those are reflectometry, so very different. And if I move ahead, wideband tympanometry was coined later on when the Titan system become commercialized, and you can run absorbance or reflectance at ambient pressure. There is no need to change the pressure, but with change of the pressure, you can actually measure it at different pressure points. Now the question is that whether that has a clinical value or not. We're going to cover that. Again, absorbance tympanometry, and Eric Holmes' workshop, as I mentioned, suggested to use the term wideband acoustic immittance to cover all these terms, and that's what we are moving toward in all the published papers. This is a system that is available by Mimosa Acoustics, so they have two versions. One is called the handheld device, as you can see here. It's called Autostat. And one is the laptop-based device, which you have the converter or the digital processor unit connects to USB to your laptop with the ER10C probe, which has the tips of the spongy, very similar to the insert phones. And it's a system that can measure your absorbance or reflectance at ambient pressure only, so it won't change the pressure. However, the unit can actually be supplied by transient or distortion product or acoustic emission for a clinical version. And so this is the probe unit of the Mimosa Acoustic, and this is the calibration cavity. The first generation of the wideband tympanometry was a research platform which was introduced by Interacoustics. And so this is a research platform, and then later on, what has happened is that that research platform changed into the Titan platform, which I'm going to cover. The Titan platform and wideband tympanometry has the capability of measuring absorbance at different pressure points. As you can see, here are the pressure points, like tympanometry in decapascal, different frequencies, up to 8,000 hertz, and you have absorbance, 0 everything is reflected, and 1 everything is absorbed. And the good thing is that once you have run this, you don't have to run your tympanogram. The machine can extract your 226 conventional tympanometry. If you say, oh, I like my conventional 226 tympanogram, it's here, you're not missing it. Or even 1K Tymp, you can get more out of it. So this is a new Titan platform, which has made it more compact and much a nice looking guy. So basically you have a Titan device which connects to the laptop via USB, and this is what you get in a 3D. So here is your pressure, and here is your frequency, and here is your absorbance. So it may be intimidating, but it is not. Actually, let's kind of simplify this. So here, if you look at the pressure and absorbance in a 2D visual display, you will see that it looks like your tympanogram, but instead of having admittance on y-axis in millimoles, you have absorbance from 0 to 1. But this very much looks like a tympanogram here. So you can have tympanogram multiple frequencies. Or you can look at it from this angle, which is your absorbance as a function of frequency. So your tympanogram, or you can look at the absorbance. So it can become simplified. So you can have your tympanograms, you can have your absorbance at different pressure points, and you get the best of both worlds. So here are additional information which you don't have to rerun the test. It will be derived by the first run of the test. You get your tympanogram at 226. You can get YBGs at 1000 hertz. You can change the frequencies to 800 hertz or 600 hertz. And this is the average of absorbance across these frequencies. And the reason that they have selected these frequencies is that some of the research have shown that the changes in the middle ear properties as a function of the disease can impact these frequencies. But you have an option to save it in a research file and then average it at different frequencies, but it would have been great to have a sliding bar to change these average frequency range so that you could actually look at the different averages. But that can be done at the second level processing. And you can have that as a function of air pressure. So your average absorbance was maximum at ambient pressure in this case, and it declined at the positive and negative pressure. So different pathology may have different impact on the loading of the TIMP. So it could potentially show that the loading the TIMP on the negative pressure and the positive pressure in different pathology may have an impact, and then compare it to the peak pressure. So it could potentially be a very useful parameters to look at for differential diagnosis of middle ear. So here are several wideband absorbance tympanometry average across those frequencies at different pressure points. So you can see at positive and negative pressure what kind of changes you can see in absorbance average. This is from Liu and colleagues in 2008. The good thing about this system is that once you do that, you can also get your absorbance at peak and ambient. So you would know if the absorbance changes as a function of tympanometric peak pressure. In this specific case, the tympanometric peak pressure was -7 decapascal. So the thick blue line is the absorbance at the ambient, and the gray one is absorbance at the peak. And not much of a difference, because there was not much of a difference between tympanometric peak pressure and the ambient pressure. So that's your absorbance. You get a lot of absorbance at mid frequencies, as you can see, and then it declines at high end and low end. So that's the typical norm. This is a video. It's about 8 minutes. I've embedded my audio on it, so I may sound nicer on the audio. But let's see if it's going to actually go through. It's about 8 minutes something. It will walk you through this. So I'll just shut up on my end, and the video will take over.
The intention of this demonstration is not to show you how to work with software. So you have to consult the manual. I've already preset some protocol, as you can see on the left side of this panel. And the module that I have is capable of doing wideband tympanometry, as well as AABR and DP and TE OAEs. What I do in each of these 3D tympanometry and wideband absorbance tabs, I've made sure that the save to research file is activated. You can go to this gearbox and make sure that those boxes have been activated, because the file is going to be saved in a format that you can do later on analysis using your Excel macro sheet that you can actually get from Interacoustic or your MATLAB. The machine is not connected to the laptop, so it's a simulation mode. I just want to walk you through to some of the tabs that are being used in clinical diagnosis. So I'll just do start. It will plot wideband absorbance across pressure, frequency, and you get a 3D demonstration, and a lot of information will be plotted in a very short period of time. So you don't have to run multiple tests. So it goes in order of the tab that you have set. I have pre-selected a criterion for reflex. You can change that based on the need of your clinic. So it should be done fast. I'll go to the 3D tympanometry tab. As you can see, you have pressure points in ear canal in decapascal, frequency from 250 Hertz to 8000 Hertz. And you have absorbance on the y-axis. 0, everything is reflected, and 1, everything is absorbed. Again, it may be intimidating looking at this figure, but it's very useful because you can look at a 2-dimension, which is absorbance as a function of air pressure. As you can see, it looks like tympanogram, like this one. Or you can look at the absorbance, which is the absorbance as a function of frequency. So if I click this box, tympanometric view, I'll go in a 2D dimension demonstration of the absorbance as a function of air pressure. And you can slide this to the right, and you will see that the probe tone changes from 226 to 8000 Hertz, and the impact of absorbance can be readily seen on the screen. So you can look at a change, and this change can be different in different pathologies. Go back to 3D. Now I can look at another 2D picture, which is the absorbance as a function of frequency. So I click on absorbance view. And right now what you see is absorbance on the y-axis and the frequency on the x-axis. And this sliding bar will change the pressure, so you can see readily the impact of the pressure, negative or positive. Right now it's ambient pressure, 0 decapascal. If I go to the left, is negative pressure. See the low frequency, you get more reflection. And you also see the maxima on absorbance changes too as I increase the negative pressure. First, it gets higher at a high frequency, and it gets shifted and lower at higher frequencies. And I'm going back to the ambient pressure. You will see that the pattern will become more normal, and then I go to positives. Essentially, a similar thing happens to the absorbance. So it's very useful to look at this figure in a 3D and 2D dimensions across different axes. It will also give you information if you look at here an equivalent ear canal volume, resonant frequency, tympanometric peak pressure. So you can actually look at those numbers. Again, the system will derive other components from this 3D wideband tympanometry, and you can actually have your plot of 226, 1000 Hertz, and here is a wideband average. You can change the frequency, so here's 226. By right-clicking, you can go 678, 800 Hertz. Always I will look at uncompensated, take the phase angle off so you can see Y, B, and G. Same thing here, and if it goes off a scale, you can adjust the scale to fit the tympanogram within the viewing window. And you can also look at the frequency at which the notch on the susceptance, or B, becomes equal to the tail, which is resonant frequency. So you have a lot of information available depending on how you would like to look at it. And this figure right at the end is a wideband absorbance, average at 375 Hertz to 2000 Hertz. And as you can see, you get an average absorbance at the ambient pressure because there was no negative middle ear pressure. This can be shifted. You have a negative pressure or positive pressure. And on the tail, you have a lower average. It could potentially be very useful in different middle ear pathology because the impact of loading on the negative or positive or at the peak can be different in different pathology. Developmentally, it could also be important as baby grows from birth to 1 month, and so the impact at tails and peak can potentially be different. And in different middle ear pathology, it could also show some distinctive pattern. So it's a very good way of looking at it. And the very last tab here is absorbance. And in this case, as you can see, there are red and gray superimposed, and it's a shaded area of normative data. And the red one is the ambient, and the gray is the peak pressure. So you can plot absorbance at the peak pressure if someone has a negative middle ear pressure, which is very important because negative pressure can actually mimic otosclerotic ears. So you want to know if compensating for the middle ear pressure will bring your absorbance to normal range or not. In this case, there's no difference because there was no negative middle ear pressure here. And the normative data here can be changed to a wider range, 90% range or 80% range, depending on how you want to look at your norm. Another very cool feature is that you can call up some examples here by clicking here, and then superimpose those examples so that compare your pattern to some typical patterns that may be associated with different middle ear pathology. Okay, so we're going to go back to the PowerPoint presentation.
Hopefully you're still awake, which is a good thing. Shrugging your shoulder a bit for the next slide. This is of Voss and colleagues, and it's a procedural issue in terms of the depth of the probe insertion. As you can see, this is a reflectance, different from absorbance because it's kind of the other way around. It's 1 minus absorbance. And you have 0, meaning that everything is absorbed, and 1, everything is reflected. So it's the other way around. So if you look at the these numbers means that the depth of insertion. So the shallow insertion is represented by this one, and the deep insertion is represented by this one, which is the actually this is the shallow. I'm sorry, it's the other way around. So the shallow insertion is 11 millimeter away from TM, and deep insertion is the 3 millimeter, which is close to the TM. So as you go from the baby blue to black, you would see that the lower tail of the absorbance changes significantly. And that could be used as an indication of a good probe fit. If you put it very deep in the canal, you would see that you would get that red or the black one, and that makes it replicable. Another way to look at a good probe fit is to look at the phase angle or the group delay, which has been suggested by Eric Holmes' workshop as another factor that has not been measured often in research, but readily most published papers are reporting on the group delay. It could also have a diagnostic value. The other way of looking at a good probe fit is looking at the lower tail of your absorbance to see if it's getting close to a lot of reflection. If you see kind of a low reflection or high absorption, that means that your probe is not being fit properly. I'll show you an example here. We intentionally put a probe shallow in the canal. Still, I could change the pressure, as you can see, but the 3D is way off the baseline. And look at the lower tail. So the lower tail is way up in absorbance. Now, it's the same individual. I put the probe, actually it's my ear. By the way, I have a big ear. So I put it deeper into my canal. As you can see, the lower tail kind of bounce back to what you expect, uniformly very low and then go high. So it's a good way to look at a good probe fit by looking at the these graphs. Again, if you put a probe insertion, this is a short-term test-retest reliability, and take it out and put it deep enough, then you get a highly replicable absorbance. So it makes your absorbance very replicable. In terms of the long-term test-retest reliability, absorbance is very good. This is of Feeney and colleagues 2014 Ear and Hearing published paper, and they tested baseline and then at different point in time. So you would see 423 days later for the some time span between first or second. And if there are no significant change in middle ear condition due to pathology, even the long-term reliability is really good in absorbance. So it will show that changes that happens as a function of change in the middle ear property can be easily traced, because if the middle ear remains intact, no changes in its structure, absorbance becomes replicable over time. So what's the take-home message? Use a deep probe insertion for good test-retest reliability. We are moving to babies. Babies are aliens. Their ears are different for different reasons. External canal is shorter. It's not bony like adult, so it's all cartilage and compliant. In adult, we have part bone, part cartilage. In babies, all soft tissues. Again, there is a size increase as a function of age. Middle ear and cavity and mastoid increase volume because there are some residual fluid in the middle ear, and then eventually, as like amniotic fluid, it will go away. So you get increased size. The eardrum also changes its orientation. Usually, it's very hard to visualize eardrum babies because it's kind of sleeping on the ear canal, and then it gets to its original angle and that increases and changes the size of the canal and the middle ear. The way that the ossicles are hanging will change, and that can have an impact on the resistance and the mass of the system. So overall, the baby's ear are very different. So here is the ear canal of the baby on the left side and ear canal of an adult. As you can see, the canal is narrower, diameter is different. That will have an impact on the gain. The eardrum is kind of close to the wall of the canal as opposed to this angle in adults. So that will have a different tension of the ossicles. The middle ear cavity is not pneumatized similarly to an adult. So a lot of changes happen. As a result, you can't use a similar feature as you would have used in adult to interpret your tympanogram. That's why we are using 1K TIMP. This is of our published study, and I've changed the figure a bit to make it in absorbance. And we tested babies at the time of birth, and same babies were tested over time up to 6 months. So it's a longitudinal study. And so that's why visit 1 is at the time of birth, visit 2 at 2 months, visit 3, 3 months, 4, 4 months, 5 months, and 6 months. So if you look at the blue, which is at the time of birth, this is the absorbance. And as you can see at the low frequency, as if you don't have a good probe fit because it's moving up. It is likely not because of the probe fit, it's because of absorbance of the low frequency by soft tissues. Because as you recall, the baby's ear are very compliant. But as we go toward different ages in month, you will see that the low frequency side becomes more adult-like. So the visit 6 and 5 are represented here. So you would see that the low frequency side, and that's part because the canal becomes more rigid. The other big difference that you would see from 1 month at the time of birth to 6 months is the high frequency side. You would see that the absorbance is lower at the high frequency side, and as the baby grows older, the absorbance gets better and better at the high frequency side. That could be an impact of the mass changes in the middle ear system as a function of age. That will improve the middle ear transfer function at the high frequency, which also may have an impact on your hearing sensitivity in babies, and may have an impact on the things that you would do, whether it's a hearing sensitivity measure or RECD measures that you would do. So there may be a need to have a normative data specific to different age groups. Here is the data recently published by the Hunter and colleagues, I believe 2016, and they looked at the absorbance at the peak as well as the group delay. So here is the ambient absorbance as a function of age. So here is blue is at the time of birth, 1 month is red, and dashed line 6 months, and then dashed line blue 9 months and 12 months. So ambient at the ambient pressure, absorbance at ambient pressure, you will see that there are developmental changes as a function of age from 0 to 1 month, and then 6 months, 9 and 12 months are kind of compiled together because not much of a change observed. The group delay or phase also shows similar changes. This is absorbance at peak. So it's one of those first studies that have published absorbance at the peak developmentally, how it's being changed, and it clearly showed that absorbance is changing from 0 to 1 month, and then 6 and 9 and 12 kind of getting very close together. So as a result of this, they have suggested that maybe we have to have a specific normative data at the time of birth and 1 month, and then maybe around 6 months of age and 9 to 12 months, the norm can be pulled together as one, and you have norm for phase angle, which is excellent to use that as a differential diagnostic tools. Another study done by Sanford and colleagues, they looked at the sound conduction and effect on distortion product with acoustic emission using wideband acoustic immittance. Basically, those who failed DP and those who passed, what are the differences that you would see on absorbance and 1K TIMP? So they had about 455 newborn hearing screening years, and 375 passed the DP screening and 80 referred. So what they did, they compared the outcome of wideband acoustic immittance in those who passed and those who referred, and they also did the same thing at 1K kilohertz tympanometry, which is standard of testing for babies. So as you can see, the shaded areas of the pass and refer are very different. So those who are pass in the light, if I go back again, okay, there we go. They're actually occupying different regions, those who pass and those who referred, and especially at the mid frequencies. So these frequencies seems to be a better indication of those who pass and referred on the wideband acoustic immittance. And they found that the absorbance is very different between 800 and 2000 hertz between those who pass and those who refer on DP. And this is the actual absorbance outcome. So the light shaded area is those who passed, absorbance data for those who pass, and the dark or evil shaded area are the absorbance for those who fail. As you can see at the 800 to 2000 hertz, it's a big difference between those who pass and referred. They also compared the 1K TIMP to see if 1K TIMP is a better predictor of the babies who pass or refer on the DP versus the absorbance. And they use something that we call a receiver operating characteristic, or ROC curve. So you're going to love this. Just to give you a quick overview of ROC curve, the y-axis is sensitivity or ability of the test to identify the target disease correctly. And the x-axis is the false alarm, meaning that identifying normal as a disease. So it's kind of a 1 minus specificity. And this graph is actually for test outcome analysis, and you have to use this one to see if a test outperforms from the other test. Just to give you a quick overview, you want to be close to upper left corner of this graph. So you're closer to the gate of heaven here. And if you draw a diagonal line here, so I'll just try to get my pointer to draw a line here for you guys. So this diagonal line is a gate of hell. So any test that is at chance is as good as using your coin. Take a coin out of your pocket and toss it, 50-50. So as you can see, the two parameter of absorbance, which is this RC curves versus the your 1K at positive and negative, they're closer to the gate of paradise, so they're better. So the area under this curves are better than the area of these. So they're outperforming 1K in prediction of the DP. So it wasn't one of the among first studies that have shown absorbance to be better than 1K in predicting the DP outcome. Another study, again, following that was Hunter and Feeney and colleagues, 2010. They also look at the DP in pass 352 and refer 141 absorbance. They looked at the absorbance at 1, 2, and 1 and 1K TIMP. Again, these are RC curve. As I mentioned, this is the chance level, the dashed line here. You don't want to be here. The closer you are here, is better. So as you can see, the absorbance data are closer to upper left corner, but 1K is lower. So again, it's showing that absorbance data are outperforming 1K TIMP in predicting the DP results. Again, this is another study by Preeve and colleague, 2013, a baby. So they look at the normal conductive and the hearing loss. And the idea was, if you look at the diagnostic ABR, tone ABR, air and bone, that's the gold standard for detecting a conductive. So it wasn't just a pass or refer. This one was just to look at the conductive hearing loss to see how good reflectance is in predicting the conductive hearing loss. And as you can see, the normative data is this shaded areas in percentile, and conductive is the dotted line, and conductive mean is the dashed line, and tick line is the mean for normal. And basically it shows that the reflectance, this is the reflectance data. As I mentioned, 0 means everything is absorbed in the reflectance, 1 is everything is reflected. So it's like the other way around. is actually predicting a conductive hearing loss in babies, which is excellent. So here is the Cohen index that they have used, and they argued that the reflectance is as good as 1K and 678 hertz TIMP in predicting a conductive hearing loss. So you're not losing the prediction if you use the absorbance. In fact, the Cohen index is a bit higher, although not statistically different for the reflectance or absorbance. Here is a more recent data published by Voss and colleagues in Ear and Hearing in 2016. Again, the good thing about this study was the same individual, one ear passed and one ear referred at the time of birth. And what they did, they followed up the babies, and at 1 month of age, they did diagnostic ABR, air, and bone. And the ear that was referred was passed on the 1 month diagnostic protocol. So likely the failure at the time of birth was because of the transient middle ear problem. So it was a better control for transient middle ear problem because all those 15 ears, for example, that failed at the time of birth passed diagnostic ABR. But what you can see is the this is a reflectance, but again, 0 means everything absorbed and 1 everything is reflected. So the pink one is, and the area is those ears, same subject, 1 ear passed, 1 ear referred, and all those ears that passed are in the pink area, and those ears that failed are in the baby blue area. So very, very different, especially at these mid frequencies. It's a huge gap, as you can see. And once they did ABR diagnostic at 1 month and checked the absorbance, once everything comes back to normal, the absorbance actually in the failed ear was no longer different from absorbance of the ear that passed. Also, a very cool study that showed that the absorbance is quite different in those babies are likely that are referred because of the transient middle ear effusion. Hunter and colleagues in the special issue of Ear and Hearing, which is a proceeds of that Eric Holmes workshop, proposed the potential application of wideband acoustic immittance in a screening protocol. So basically, by combining OAE and wideband acoustic tympanometry and wideband acoustic reflex, you can actually have a screening tool that can not only help you out to say if it's a pass or refer, it can also tell you what is the potential reason for refer, which is not the case with any screening paradigm that you use because it's a binary outcome. It's either pass or refer. Then you have to do diagnostic tests to see what is the likely reason. So different pattern could emerge that is consistent with different potential outcome for failure. So you can actually have a group tailored to rescreening and a group tailored to go immediately get diagnostic profiling. So that's a very cool feature, an application of this system for that purpose. Well, what about the children? Wideband acoustic immittance in children. One of the most common things that you would see in children is a negative middle ear pressure. This is a study in cadaver ears by Voss and publishing Ear and Hearing. And they look at inducing negative pressure and positive pressure. So here are negative and here are positive. So what you see, the impact is probably the same at the low frequency. The more negative or positive pressure, you get more reflection at the low end of the absorbance. However, what you see on the negative side is that by increasing the negative pressure, you see a shift on the absorbance maximum to the right, to the higher frequency. And that's what we saw when we look at that video demonstration that I did when I slided that bar toward negative side. So that's the very common impact of the negative, and that will tell you the importance of compensating for the middle ear pressure, because these patterns at the high negative and positive pressure represent a stiffening pathology. So they can mimic pathologies such as otosclerosis. So you kind of, if you do it at ambient pressure, you don't know if it's negative pressure or it's kind of a stiffening pathology as a result of stapes fixation. So compensation of the negative pressure can actually help you out to actually make that distinction. This is off the published paper of Shaver and Son, 2013, that shows the impact of the negative pressure. So you would see that the normal one is in the open boxes here, and the negative pressure. So the more negative pressure, the more of a change you would get at the low frequency uniformly. So as the negative pressure increases, you get more and more. These are simulated negative pressure, I believe. But again, the paper is there, but the impact is similar to what was observed in cadaver ears. The tympanic membrane perforation is another thing that you could see, and this is also simulated in cadaver ears by Voss and colleagues in 2012. The idea is that the normal is shown in the thick black line, and different perforation sizes from very small 0.5 to very big 3.3 are shown. The take-home message from this slide is that with a smaller perforation, you would see a much bigger changes in absorbance. So as you can see, absorbance increases significantly because of that perforation and including the middle ear cavity into the volume at the low frequency. And you see a kind of distinctive maxima on absorbance. Here is a reflectance, that's why you see minima, but minima in reflectance is maxima on absorbance at around 1 kilohertz. As perforation size increases, you will see that the low frequency side gets closer and closer to what is normal. And that's the idea. Small perforation can actually have a much bigger impact on the absorbance versus much larger perforation. This is off a study that my thesis student did, Alison Beers, published in 2010, and we tested a group of children who were normal, school-age children, and a group of children who were identified having middle ear fusion by the means of automicroscopy and some laryngotomies, and negative middle ear pressure. So the normals are this one. It's a reflectance. So again, 0 means high absorption and 1 means everything's reflected. If you want to see the absorbance, imagine absorbance, you just have to invert this to the other side. So the normals are represented here, and this one is a mild negative pressure, and then high negative pressure in children, school-age children, and this is the fusion group. So as you can see, it shows exactly the same thing in simulated cases. So negative pressure will make more reflection at the low frequencies. And the absorbance for middle ear fusion will drop down across all frequencies. And the normative data here shows in bluish area. So this is the mean, and percentile values is and the lighter one is a 90th percentile of the so anything below this is not normal. Anything above this is not normal. Everything falls within this white area is normal. As you can see, all those cases with effusion were abnormal. It's an excellent detection for effusion cases. This is from the Johns paper, which is sitting right beside me, published in 2012 in Laryngoscope. Again, they look at the normal group and the middle ear group. And as you can see, the normal group light shaded area, and dark area is for the effusion group. Similar direction across all frequencies, drop down, so more overlap in his study. But again, it's the same direction in terms of absorbance is lowered across all frequencies. In Down syndrome, this is in Hunter and colleagues published data recently in 2017. They look at typically developed kids, which is these guys, who are normal, and typically it means that with non-syndromic syndromes with conductive hearing loss. And these are the Down syndromes normal and with conductive hearing loss, and with tubes, PE tubes too. And as you can see, the absorbance changes as a function of conductive hearing loss, similar to what you would see in a Down syndrome. So low frequency drops down, and in the tubes, you will see more of a change here. So this is a PE tube and a PE tube in the Down syndrome. And again, they had the group delay. So group delay also shows similar changes from normal to conductive and the P tube. So that's a good indication that the phase dealer has also have a diagnostic implication. This is of Sanford and Brockett published data on the P tubes and the otitis media group. So these are the ambience, these are the absorbance at ambient for individuals with the cerebral otitis media. So the normative data is this shaded area, and the mean for otitis media group and all the individuals. So you can see a change mostly at these frequency range. And this is a P tube group, and you would see similar pattern as you would see with a small perforation of the eardrum. And the maximum absorbance is a bit lower than 1K that is typically shown by Walsh to be seen in a small perforation. But again, if the P is tube, so it can be used to check the P tube, patent P tube. So that shows that has an implication in that area. So we are moving to the adult section. So if you're still awake, we're getting close to the end of the show. So this is off a paper published by us in the same supplement of ear and hearing preceding the Eric Holmes workshop. And it's a reflectance. It shows that the ethnicity have an impact on normative data. So 92 participants Caucasian and 94 participants Chinese. You would see that the Chinese group have higher reflection at the low frequency compared to Caucasian group, or Caucasian group have a higher absorbance at the low frequency, but the high frequency is the other way around, meaning that the Chinese are more efficient transferring the high frequencies into the middle ear compared to the Chinese. This study has been replicated numerous times by us and some other investigators. So it seems that ethnicity may have an impact. You may ask, why is that? It's nothing to do with ethnicity. It could have something to do with the size, because if you look at the Chinese in general, BMI indexes, they have a smaller body size indices compared to Caucasian. And we have seen that from infants to children to adults, the size of the ear canal, middle ear, can have an impact on absorbance. So maybe later on, if you could come up with an idea of a change of a size based on some other indices, then we can actually use appropriate normative data based on size, because the size of the canal and middle ear cavity changes as we grow older. Similar things can happen in different ethnic groups, because the smaller ethnic groups can have a smaller body sizes compared to Chinese, similar to the male and female. Here is the absorbance data at static and peak pressure. So you would see that there are differences between, even in the normal groups, between absorbance measured at the ambient pressure and peak pressure, because not all normals have tympanometric peak pressure at 0 decapascal. So that's another thing that you should consider when you do absorbance. Middle ear becomes more effective transferring energy at the peak pressure. This is of Mimosa acoustics and interacoustic comparisons, again in Caucasian and Chinese. So the issue is that if I test absorbance at ambient between the two different machines, if the norms could be different, it shows that it could potentially be different at the mid frequencies. It may have to do something with the calibration. Again, whether that could have an impact on clinical decision making, that's another issue that needs to be addressed. Here is recently done by my research students, and it has looked at the research system versus the Mimosa acoustics versus the research device from Interacoustic versus the Titan platform absorbance data. And then as you can see, they are very close together across all frequencies, and there are some differences at mid, some low frequencies, not statistically different. Again, it may become statistically different at 1 or 2 frequency, but the main question is that if it may have an impact on clinical decision analysis, whether those norms used on Titan can be used on the Mimosa or vice versa, and that make a difference in terms of detection of different middle ear pathology. Again, ambient and peak, it shows differences. So again, this is on a research device more difference than the Titan, because the Titan has a way to compensate when you put the probe in to release the pressure, but the research device doesn't. So that's why you see a bigger difference between ambient and peak. And this is again between Titan and RefWin, very similar. So between research device to clinical machine, very, very close together. Another thing that I want to show you, this is the absorbance average, and average between 375 to 2000 hertz. You will see that the difference between Caucasian and Chinese is much, much bigger when you do the averaging. So it could potentially, if it could potentially show a better distinction in normals between different ethnicity, it could potentially have a better indication of a change of the middle ear as a function of a disease. Moving to the three most common things that you may see in adult, which is stapes fixation, ossicular discontinuity, and superior canal dehiscence. And a very good paper on this one is Nakajima and colleagues, 2013, again published in the same issue of Ear and Hearing. Let's look at it. This is off our study. So otosclerotic ears, as you can see, stapes fixation increases the stiffness and will have an impact on absorbance at the low frequency. These are otosclerotic ears, 28 surgically confirmed. And the normative data, this white area is normal, and these are all 28 otosclerotic ears. Most of them you will see that the low frequency side get more reflection, but there's a lot of overlap. Test performance analysis between reflectance to conventional tympanometry. So this is a conventional tympanometry, ROC, in that group. It's operate at a chance, meaning that for conventional tympanometry, you can easily toss your coin. You are as good as not doing tympanometry. But look at the reflectance or absorbance at 500 hertz. It's significantly better than the conventional tympanometry. So it shows that it's outperforming using an objective method to decipher the normal from otosclerotic ears. Ossicular discontinuity, this is a simulated cases in a cadaver ear. So they snipped the incudostapedial joint here, and this is the normal, the thick line. You will see that immediately there's a large drop in reflectance or large increase in absorbance at the low frequency. This is very typical to ossicular discontinuity in terms of the typical pattern. So what that means that the pattern that you would see in absorbance may have a differential diagnostic value. So a study by Nakajima and colleagues, they looked at the absorbance in stapes fixation, ossicular discontinuity, and superior canal dehiscence. As you know, superior canal dehiscence will show you a false conductive, but it represents absorbance in the same direction as otosclerotic ears. So if you look at these figures, which is the transmittance, it's absorbance but in dB, and the reflectance here, the distinctive pattern of ossicular discontinuity is very robust, so it won't overlap. But the problem is dehiscence versus otosclerotic ears. So what they suggested, the dehiscence, ossicular discontinuity, and otosclerotic ears will have a different airborne gap features if you average between 1,000 to 4,000. So what they did, they looked at the airborne gap data between the three groups, and they noticed that the average airborne gap, these are the frequency and airborne gap, is different, specifically at these frequency range, 1,000 to 4K, especially between stapes fixation and the ossicular discontinuity, and also this superior canal dehiscence is very different. So they propose if we plot absorbance average as a function of average airborne gap, that may have a better distinctive feature, and in fact it was. So here is the airborne gap average between 1 to 4, so this is magnitude, and on the y-axis you have absorbance in dB, average between 600 Hz to 1K, and you would see it as a completely occupying different region without any overlap. In fact, if you look at the sensitivity and specificity data, it's excellent if you use a combination of absorbance and average airborne gap to distinguish these three, because all these three will show you normal tympanograms at conventional frequencies. Case studies. I provide this slide from the Interacoustic website. So different patterns could be associated with different pathologies. So not only the value or absolute value can be used in normative data, but also patterns similar to type A, B, C, Jaeger can be used similar feature in the absorbance data. So here is a case that we did. It was a kid, I think it was about 4 or 5 years old. And if you look at the audiogram, there was an airborne gap confirmed at low frequency. Again, not much of a helper at other frequencies. Had a flat timp on the left side, OE absent on the left, but on the right, timp at 226 was normal, and the OE was present. Typically, you would expect with the conductive loss for OE to be absent, but that's not the case. It depends on the level of the fluid and also the viscosity of the fluid. Look at the absorbance data. This is the normative data of the same group of children, same age group. So anything that falls within this range is normal. The left ear is clearly not normal, as you can see, a lot of reflection across all frequency. The right ear is not normal, but better absorbance, but still not normal. And when the surgeon looked at the ear using automicroscopy and pneumatic otoscopy, they identify level of the fluid in the right ear and filled fluid in the left. So the level of the fluid was different. So it was partial fluid on the right side and full fluid occupying middle ear cavity on the left. This is of another study that we are doing currently. We have a large pile of otosclerotic ears, so it's one of them. So right ear you see a bit of drop at low frequencies, and left ear is a clear conductive with a very distinctive notch at 2K. On the audiograms, a 33 years old female we just recently tested. OE present on the right, absent on the left on the DP. And look at the absorbance. Normative data is shaded. See, right, more reflection, so it could be bilateral, but initial stages on the right, and the left is much more, as you can see. And it's a confirmed case of otosclerotic ears during the surgery. Left ear was operated. This is a mixed one that we did. So as you can see, a conductive loss on the left, a sloping loss, mild to moderate at the high frequencies. On the right, has a very high negative pressure here. As you can see, the negative pressure was minus 241 decapascal. If you would have only looked at your tympanogram at the low frequency, this is your tympanogram at low frequency, it would look like a flat. You would say it's a fusion. And this is the absorbance pattern at the ambient. So you see a lot of fluid type pattern. But if you compensate for it, this is the pattern you would get. So it's not fluid. And this is the absorbance average, as you can see. You have a clear distinctive peak. It's not consistent with the fluid. And in fact, was operated on and was ossicular fixation. Pattern of perforation on 3D can also be distinctive. This is of one of the ENTs in Denmark, which Interacoustic shared. And you can see a distinctive pattern here, which ripples like that on absorbance if you see it from this side. So it could be very distinctive in perforation, and we have replicated this pattern in our cases too. Again, dual pathology, perforation and ossicular discontinuity. Again, this is flat with a high canal volume, showing a perforation. Look at the absorbance, again, rippling, and you see a distinctive maxima at low frequency, which is a good. So even through perforation, you can see that distinctive maxima and absorbance, which is very distinctive for ossicular discontinuity. Newborn cases, again, it's very good. This is off a case which had a flat tymp at 1K, OE absent, broadband reflex at 1K, absent ipsilaterally on both sides. And you can see the norm data in ranges of black here, and clearly abnormal on reflectance. So from babies to children to adults has a very good distinctive features. So I won't go through more cases of babies. I just move on. So basically, you have your normal here. You will see that your ossicular discontinuity or disarticulation is in green. It's a distinctive feature. Your TM perforation, also a small one, shows very similar to this, but at the high frequency is different from ossicular discontinuity. On the static pressure, which is the blue here, you see a very high reflection at the low frequency and a shift on the maxima. Stable fixation, you see again a lot of reflection at the low frequency. And fluid, which is the red one, you see a drop in absorbance across all frequencies. And this figure can be represented in absorbance, so similar, simplified again. So these pattern recognition can be later on incorporated into an algorithm, so your machine can actually do that and then come up with some potential pathology for you. So it's amenable to kind of an automation. So that's a good thing about it. So again, if you want to have further review, you can look at the special issue in ear and hearing. And there are some studies that have published measuring reflexes on using wideband acoustic immittance. A review of that is in Scherer and colleagues in 2013. And the two most recent studies published by Keefe and Hunter, one for adults and one for babies, on how to implement wideband acoustic immittance for measuring acoustic reflex. Because when you do acoustic reflex, you measure the change of admittance at one frequency. On this one, you can see the changes across wider range of frequencies. You can use absorbance for newborn screening. You can detect conductive losses, measure speed of reflex, and adjust OE using pressure. And also it's amenable to pattern recognition, which I discussed earlier. So the future is very rosy on this. This is the Eric Holmes workshop. Again, I'm not asking you to guess the names, but I put the names up here. So that's me. If you wonder, again, you have to put your shades on. It's a bald head here. Here is the Stefan Stempfeld and David Liddy and John Rozowski, Chris Sanford, Lisa Hunter, Patrick Feeney, Beth Reeve, Susan Voss, Steve Neely, Joseph Kai, Bob Margolis, Heidi Nakajima, and Boo Christensen is here. And this is the special issue. Lisa Hunter and myself published a book on immittance, so that's also a good resource. There's a special issue, Journal American Academy of Audiology, on wideband acoustic immittance. That's also good reading. A new book will come up, which is edited by Stavros Hazopoulos and colleagues. I wrote a chapter on wideband acoustic immittance for that book. It will be published hopefully in the new year, so have your eyes open. Again, thank you for listening, and hopefully most of you stay awake, and we are still in good terms.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Shahnaz, for that very nice presentation. We're going to open the floor right now for any questions that might be there.
So the question is that why would small perforation result in higher absorbance? So when you have a small perforation, that small perforation will add on, it acts like a kind of a small hole to a bigger volume of a mass behind it. So imagine that it acts like a pump. And when you have a much bigger perforation, it becomes like a one unit. The ear canal and the middle ear becomes like a one unit. So the low frequency side becomes similar, but still you have differences at the mid and high frequencies. But the biggest impact is at the small perforation, because it acts as if you have a small passageway to a much bigger cavity and acts like a pump. you see a much bigger difference with a smaller perforation. The next question is that common types of conductive loss in adults, airborne gap versus absorbance. You mentioned there's an overlap in regions of each type of a loss, but there do seem to be outlier overlapping. Can you comment upon that? So what will happen, there's always an overlap regardless of which test you would use, but if you look at it from beyond only one test, like only absorbance or only airborne gap, there's a concept in clinical decision analysis. I'll just touch base shortly. You can combine tests that are not correlated. Do not combine the tests that are correlated because they identify the same disease and the same normals. So combining them will not improve. So if the airborne gap can decipher some conductive pathologies that the absorbance can't, and absorbance can decipher some pathologies that the airborne gap can't, then combining the two can potentially improve your distinctive power, and that's the case. So that means that airborne gap, despite the overlap that it had with different type of fixation, discontinuity, and the superior canal dehiscence and absorbance, they're not correlated. So combining them will provided a very good distinctive areas. Although there was a bit of overlap, so averaging absorbance across these frequencies and averaging airborne gap, they're kind of showing a very good distinction, which is much better than individual tests. So if you would have wanted to use only airborne gap or absorbance alone. Excellent question. The question is that some people are looking at the WBT in patient with Meniere disease. Do you have any experience with this? A study done by Voss and colleague in 2012, I believe, or 13. I can actually look up the reference. What they did, they asked a group of patients to hang their head downward from the bed, so increasing the intracranial pressure. And they noticed that there was a difference in absorbance by doing that. So potentially may have an impact if there's endolymphatic hydro because it changes the pressure. So yes, it could potentially have an impact, but we need to see the results in Meniere cases. The problem with Meniere cases is that physician will have the diagnosis, but there's no gold standard. So I mean, with acoustic schwannoma, you have surgery or MRI, but with Meniere is a kind of a physician diagnosis, so still have to be rectified on that front, but yes, there's a potential in assessment of changes of intracranial pressure using wideband acoustic immittance. Thank you very much, all of you guys, for lending your ears, and if you happen to slept over the presentation, that's perfectly all right.